All right, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about the structures, power, and function of Congress. Let's do it. All right, so this video has a ton of information. So we're going to break it up into three sections. First, we'll talk about the Senate, then we'll talk about the House, and then we'll talk about Congress with the House and Senate together. All right, so let's start off with the Senate. To begin with, we're going to consider some of their non-legislative roles. Remember, these are jobs that only belong to the Senate. Now, the first one is confirmation power. So this is when the president would nominate somebody for a job, and this includes things like federal judges, cabinet secretaries, and heads of executive agencies. What the Senate then does is they choose to confirm that person, allowing them to have that job, or they can refuse or deny that confirmation. So this is a very important function that the Senate plays. Similarly, the Senate also has the power to ratify treaties. So they can, again, ratify the treaty or they can refuse to do so. All right, so we're going to talk about the leadership of the Senate. And to begin with, we're going to mention the president of the Senate, who's actually the vice president of the United States. Now, the only time that this position actually matters or really means anything is if there is a tie vote in the Senate. So if you have a 50-50 vote, then the president of the Senate or the vice president comes to the Senate and will cast that tie-breaking vote. Besides that, though, the vice president doesn't have any real role. So the real leader of the Senate is the Senate Majority Leader. And that is a person from the majority party, and they're the ones who actually preside over the Senate and take that leadership role. Now, when we talk about floor debate in the Senate, it's important to realize that there are fewer rules in the Senate than there are in the House. This is going to allow individual senators to have a tremendous amount of influence over whether bills pass or don't pass. So some of the things that can be done only in the Senate are filibusters, holds, and riders. So let's talk about each of these. A filibuster is a long speech that is designed to delay action and prevent a bill from coming to a vote. This can only occur in the Senate because, well, there is no time limit for how long a senator can speak, and there is no requirement that they have to be on topic when they do speak. So a senator can speak for as long as he or she wishes about whatever he or she wishes. And they can in fact do this for so long that they can prevent a bill from ever being voted upon. So this is one tactic that can be used only in the Senate to prevent passage of legislation that a senator or a group of senators actually disagrees with and wants to prevent from passing. Similarly, a senator can issue a hold on a bill, and a hold prevents that bill from being voted on. So technically it's a request for more information, but what it in reality does is it prevents the Senate from discussing that bill, from debating that bill, and if they can't discuss and debate it, then that means that they can't vote on it either, so it can't become a law. So holds and filibusters are tremendously effective ways for senators from the minority party to prevent legislation from passing that they disagree with. Now, it's important to know that filibusters and holds can be forcibly ended. This is done by a cloture motion. So this is a 3/5 vote that would forcibly cut off debate on that bill. So what it essentially does is it means that if 60 members of the Senate agree, there will be no more debate, no more talking about that bill. It will come to a vote. The reality is that because of filibusters combined with this 60 vote requirement for cloture, it really takes 60 members to be within a single party to vote together to have full control of the Senate so they can actually pass controversial legislation. If they only have 59 members, and if the 41 minority party members stick together, they won't be able to invoke cloture, which means the minority party can filibuster and prevent the passage of bills that they disagree with. Another difference in the Senate is that senators are allowed to attach riders to a bill. These are non-germane amendments to a bill. That word germane means relevant or on topic. So a non-germane amendment is an amendment that has nothing to do with the original bill. It can be off topic. So in the Senate, you can have a bill that's dealing with, let's say, defense, and you can add a rider to it about anything you want, education or the environment or some other policy. This can, again, only happen in the Senate. Another difference in the Senate is they have something called unanimous consent agreements. So remember, whereas filibusters and holds slow down the legislative process, Unanimous consent agreements do the opposite. They can actually allow legislation to go through faster. And what it is essentially an agreement that says, all right, we're going to waive the normal rules of the Senate so that we can quickly expedite debate on the floor, so that we can go through and discuss these things more quickly and pass this bill faster than we normally would be able to do so. All right, so let's consider the House of Representatives now. In the House of Representatives, leadership is much more important than it is in the Senate. Recall that in the Senate, an individual senator, no matter how new they are, they can do things like filibuster and issue holds. In the House, those things can't happen. So what happens is there is a much larger reliance on leadership positions. So this includes things like committee chairs. The chairman of a committee is the leader of that committee, and they are always from the majority party. So again, we have a tremendous advantage here that the majority party enjoys in Congress, and specifically here in the House of Representatives. Now, speaking of leadership, the Speaker of the House is the most powerful person in Congress, specifically here in the House of Representatives. And they are the one who presides over the House. They schedule bills for debate, and they also help the passage of their party's legislation and their legislative priorities. So there's also an additional step that bills in the House must go through that isn't required in the Senate. And that's that all bills are sent to the House Rules Committee. And this committee does, I hope, exactly what it sounds like. They make rules. So they don't edit the bill, they don't mark it up, they don't do anything like that. But what they do is they make rules for the debate about that bill when it reaches the floor. So rules like how long are members of the House allowed to talk about that bill when it's their turn to speak? Are they allowed to make any amendments? So these are things that the House Rules Committee will consider. So along with that, when the bill does finally reach the floor for debate, there are things like a germaneness requirement that have to come into play. And that is the requirement that all discussion and conversation must be relevant and on topic. So you're not allowed to talk about anything you want, like in the Senate. In the House, it has to be about the bill at hand. And as just mentioned, the Rules Committee sets the time limit, so there is a strict time limit that governs how long a member of the House can speak for, again preventing something like a filibuster from taking place in the House. Another difference is that only the House allows for a discharge petition. This is the idea that a bill might be trapped in committee. So we're going to talk about committees in just a moment, but that's where bills go first. They're sent to standing committees, and sometimes a bill might not be passing out of that committee. If your bill is stuck in committee, what you can do is you can try to get a discharge petition passed. This requires a majority vote of the entire House. And if a majority of the House agrees with you and they want your bill to come to the floor for debate, discussion, and to be voted on, then they can pass that discharge petition, which will force your bill out of committee and to the floor for debate. So speaking of committees, there are two main types of committees that we want to discuss here: standing and conference committees. Now, it's important to note that now we're talking about both the House and the Senate. All right, so a representative or a senator introduces their bill, and it will then be assigned to a specific standing committee. Standing committees are permanent. This is where bills are first introduced and assigned, and this is where most of the work takes place. This is where the edits and the revisions take place. The committees will hold hearings to decide whether or not this bill is really necessary, and if it is, how exactly it should be worded. The committees will then vote to either allow the bill to continue on the legislative process or it'll stop right there. Most bills never make it out of committee, and they will simply be shelved or tabled, and they will never become law. There is one additional role for standing committees that doesn't happen now during the legislative process, but actually takes place later once a bill has been passed into law. And that's that the standing committee is in charge of overseeing the implementation of that law to make sure that the executive branch is enforcing the law the way that Congress intended for it to be done. We're going to talk about that a lot more later. So what about conference committees? A conference committee is made up of both senators and representatives. And the reason for their existence is that sometimes the House will pass one version of a bill and the Senate will pass the same bill, but it won't be exactly the same. Now, the president can't sign a bill if it's not exactly the same, so it needs to be revised. So that's where this conference committee comes into play. So the conference committee, with both senators and representatives, will come together and they will try to negotiate and compromise on one single version of the bill. Now, if they succeed, the bill will go back to the House, back to the Senate, and it will be voted on once again. Because again, the important thing here is the president must have one single bill that was passed by both the House and the Senate for him to sign into law. All right, and our last topic in this video is about money. Congress has the power of the purse, so this requires them to pass a federal budget. So they're the ones who fund the federal government. There are two types of spending that Congress engages in. There's something known as discretionary and mandatory spending. Discretionary spending is spending that must be approved every single year by law by Congress. Defense is by far the largest portion of discretionary spending. It makes up about half of the discretionary budget. So each year, Congress decides how much money to use to fund the military. Education is another example of discretionary spending. On the other hand, there are some types of spending that Congress is required to engage in by law. So previous laws have been passed that required this money to be spent regardless of whether or not Congress passes a budget. This is mandatory spending. And mandatory spending is primarily for two main things: entitlement programs and interest on the national debt. So entitlement programs provide benefits to people who are entitled to them by law. So there's a law that says if you are such and such age, then you can receive Social Security. If your income is below this threshold, you can receive Medicaid benefits, etc. So that's one thing that are required by law. Congress must pay for these entitlement programs, whether or not they budget it or not. So a really important question is, well, which one of these types of spending are larger, mandatory or discretionary? And the fact is that mandatory spending makes up over 2/3 of the federal budget. It's actually about 70% these days. So that means that about 70% of all money spent by Congress, they have to spend. They have no choice. By law, they are required to engage in this spending. The only way they can change mandatory spending is by passing new legislation that would alter those programs that already exist. And as you remember from our discussion of filibusters, this can be quite difficult to change things like Social Security or Medicare because, for one thing, they are often politically popular, and for a second thing is that this would require at least 60 senators to support, and that is extremely difficult to make happen. So, as we talk about this, there is an important consequence to keep in mind for the AP exam, and that is as mandatory spending continues to grow, and it is growing over time. About 4 decades ago, it made up less than 25% of all federal spending. Today, it's 70%. So as mandatory spending takes up a larger and larger portion of the federal budget, that means that Congress's ability to spend on discretionary programs shrinks. It becomes smaller and smaller. So this is actually diminishing Congress's power, diminishing their authority, and diminishing their ability to engage in discretionary spending unless they choose to do a couple of things: to raise taxes, which is politically unpopular, or to increase the national debt, which is also unpopular, but this tends to be the route that Congress picked. And two final things to consider in this section are pork barrel spending and log rolling. Pork barrel legislation refers to laws that are passed that provide tangible benefits to a specific congressional district. So representatives often support legislation that will help provide jobs, money, programs, things like that for members of their district to help them to get reelected. Similarly, there's something that is called log rolling that takes place, and this is the vote trading that goes on. This is where representatives say, all right, I'll vote for your pork barrel spending that I don't really care about if you vote for mine. So yeah, I'll vote for that new bridge in your district if you vote for the subsidy that will help farmers in my district. All right, so that's a ton of information. Take a deep breath, try to absorb all of it, watch it again if you need to. But until next time, this has been a La Money production. All right, thanks guys for watching this video. Again, I really hope that it helped. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Hit that like button for me. You know I really appreciate it. Thank you guys so much. See you next time.